24. Item 1 is attendance. I'd just like to welcome our colleagues from the HDRC Work and University of South Wales to the Chamber this morning. Welcome. I look forward to working with you. Item 2 is apologies. I don't believe there are any apologies we need to note. Item 3 is declarations of interest. There anything there?
Thank you, Leader. I'm not aware of any interests to be declared, but if you ask a question or into a debate about a specific matter on the agenda, then you can consider whether you have an interest to declare at that time. Thank you.
Thanks. Colleagues, okay? Anything comes up, then raise that as usual. Item 4, then, is the minutes from the meeting on the 5th of November. Is everyone happy with those? Any questions? No questions, all happy? Okay. Item 5 is update on actions. There are no actions outstanding from the last meeting. So item 6 then is the initial revenue estimates report for 2025-26. I'll bring in Rob.
Morning all. Okay, so this item, this is a report that you get most years, or every year. So this is to give you an update on the initial revenue estimates process that we've been working through in readiness really for next Wednesday when the provisional settlement is coming out. We'll have a much clearer picture on where we stand budget-wise. So in terms of the report, just to give a quick overview of the contents. So just for context, we put the latest forecast, revenue forecast in there. It shows an improved position compared to month 5. I think it's important to emphasise that that's not... so on a like-for-like basis, it's broadly in line. So basically the improvement that we're reporting is because we brought in some of the mitigations that we outlined in the month 5 report. So some of those sort of corporate mitigations are now in place, but on a like-for-like basis, the position is broadly similar to where it was the previous month, and the reasons for the adverse variance are broadly the same as well. What we do obviously hope to see is as the year progresses, and when you get your month 8 update, which will be at January Cabinet, you'll see that that position hopefully is moving in the right direction. Obviously, we want to get as close to 0 by the end of the financial year. So that's just for context. In terms of the estimates themselves, so we've gone through a detailed process. So lead finance officers working very closely with their respective strategic directors. And what's been developed over that period of work is an initial budget gap comparing this year's with next year's of just over 20 million. But then bringing in some specific grant funding that we're expecting to receive, and we've actually in the process of receiving notification now, bring that gap down to over 80 million. So that's just the starting point, and it's set out in that table in section 4.2. So you can see where the major changes are year on year. The next section just outlines the assumptions and the factors behind what are generally increases in cost and estimates. I won't go into those in any detail. And then we introduced the kind of baseline assumptions around unhypothecated funding. So we're working on a 1% increase in our core funding, our revenue support grant from Welsh Government. And that was based on the best information that was published at the time. Obviously, since then, the UK government have published their draft budget, and there's obviously a direction of travel being signalled in terms of funding for public services. So 1% is most likely on the low side now. We would hope to have a more positive settlement than that, but we'll obviously only know when that provisional settlement is announced next Wednesday. So for now, that's based on 1% increase. The other major factor there is council tax, so that's based on 4.95% increase, which is consistent with the previous year and in line with our medium-term planning assumptions. So taking that into account leaves us with a gap of 13.5 million. And the importance of that is that's broadly in line with where we were when we were doing our medium-term modelling, which means that the work that's been undertaken through the Apollo programme off the back of that was based on roughly the right figure, so it's been proportionate to the challenge that we're facing. So some of that Apollo work has already been reflected in the estimates, and section 6.3 outlines some items that are already in those estimates. But then of even more relevance is 6.4 onwards, which sets out other items that have been developed through the Apollo programme that we're expecting to be delivered and ultimately help to reduce that gap. There's some big ticket items within there, most notably the £2 million saving in connection with early intervention and prevention services, but then a number of smaller items which add up to a not insignificant amount. And in totality, that comes to just under 3 million, so bringing that gap down to 10.681. We then looked at other options for reducing the gap, so Section 7 onwards. Critically, the plan around children's services and the transition plan, so taking the £2.4 million pressure that's in the initial estimates and developing an approach for mitigating that longer term and funding that on a transitional basis in the intervening period. So in effect, mitigating that pressure within the estimates. Also looked at schools and are working on the basis of a similar approach to previous years where schools will be funded their pay pressures and in doing so would then be required to absorb any non-pay pressures, and that comes to 374,000. We've looked at specific items that were in the initial estimates. Could they be removed, absorbed, in full or in part? 308,000 there. And also looked at alternative funding sources for specific pressures. So we've identified 3 such examples, providing a potential benefit of nearly 900,000. We've also made an assumption around the continuation of some of the grant funding that we were initially modelling as coming to an end, so a figure of 800,000 there. And also we're making an assumption around the CENCOM service and that the other local authority partners will meet their share of uplifts, which would be broadly consistent with previous years. So taking all of that into account, we're left with a gap of 5.7 million, which is obviously still a significant gap, but obviously that's before we hear the announcement from next week. And I think just to give context, every 1% uplift on our core funding from Welsh Government equates to approximately 1.7 million. So even if, hypothetically, it was to increase from 1% to 3%, that would be an extra 3.4, 3.5 million that we would receive in core funding. So that would quite quickly eat into that gap. But clearly that wouldn't address the gap in full, and there would still need to be other mitigations identified. So that's the process that's being worked through now. Directors working with their lead finance officers to try and identify other opportunities to mitigate that gap. And that's really where we are in terms of, until we get to that point next week, and then we'll have a much clearer picture. There's a couple of risks just to flag. One is, obviously, we don't know what the settlement is, but we are hopeful that it'll be more positive than we've been assuming. And also there's the question around the national insurance change that the UK government announced at the end of October in terms of the increase in the rate that employers pay, but also the threshold from which it needs to be paid. We've done a broad estimate that could cost the council in the region of £2.5 million, but there's been fairly sort of clear direction of travel from UK government that the public sector will be supported with that pressure. So our modelling is predicated on that pressure being met. It's a little bit more opaque in terms of third-party services and whether it will just be our direct costs that are covered. But just to flag that pressure is not in the estimates because we are assuming that it will be funded over and above any uplift in the settlement we receive. It's important to flag this report, or a very similar version to this report, has been taken through the Cross-Cutting Scrutiny Committee, and so they received that on the 20th of November, had an opportunity to debate, have provided feedback, and a couple of recommendations which are set out in Section 10. We've said in the report that we will take those recommendations forward. And then in terms of next steps, that's set out in Section 11. I won't go through that in any major detail, but there are obviously a number of reports that will come forward to either yourselves or the Scrutiny Committee over the next couple of months, but clearly a lot hinges on next Wednesday and what that settlement announcement suggests. So recommendations are simply just to note the report. Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Rob. Sue.
Interested in what you were saying about not being clear yet what the impact for national insurance employers' contributions would be for organisations with whom we hold contracts for delivery. Is that likely to become clear next Wednesday, or is that likely to be delayed further?
I don't anticipate. I think next Wednesday will be largely about Welsh Government's announcement in terms of their own budget. I think a bit like we've had in this financial year with things like teachers' pensions uplift and pensions associated with the fire service, I think some of those discussions will go on for longer between Welsh Government and the UK Government and the Treasury. So I would anticipate, and there has been suggestions that we may not hear exactly what we're going to receive on that front until possibly even into the early part of the next financial year. So we'll set our budget on the basis that it will be funded, which is exactly consistent with what we did on those two other items this year, and you know, hopefully we'll find out early next financial year, what we're going to get on that front. But I wouldn't anticipate knowing for definite next week.
Sorry, are we setting the budget based on an assumption that the contracts will also be funded?
So that's something we'll obviously develop as we go through the process. It's not entirely clear, so you know, we will obviously try and set a budget that's prudent in that respect. So we'll obviously do more detailed work around those figures, and part of the final budget deliberations will need to take into account whether we think there's any risk that we perhaps need to guard against before we get that clarity.
Thank you.
No, I'd just like to thank Rob for the report and the calm, open and tenacious way that we've been dealing with that challenging budget gap this year, and we'll continue to do so. I look forward to the announcement next week of the budget, and hopefully that will help us close some of that gap. Certainly, we all need to play our part in addressing the challenge that faces public services if we're to have public services that we want and our residents deserve for the future. So that work is done sort of calmly and behind the scenes. I think is a very important part of securing that future, but also next week's announcement is key to that too. If there are no other questions, the recommendations are at paragraph 14.1. It's recommended that Cabinet notes the updated financial forecast for 24-25, notes the initial estimates and proposed actions for addressing the budget gap, and also notes the timetable for the remainder of the 25-26 budget setting process. Have a show of hands in favour. That's carried unanimously. Thank you for the reports. Next, we move on to the council tax-based report. And if I bring in Nigel.
So it's not me. Thank you, Leader. Leader, isn't he? This is a routine report that we've got to approve it each year. We've got to agree our council tax base. The council tax is the base as calculated will go up by 123 properties. The report proposes no other changes to any of our discounts or approach. So not a lot more to say other than that, Leader. It's just a routine report. We've already submitted the figures to Welsh Government. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. No support the main points of this report, especially the decision to keep the collection rate the same. I think that's the right thing to do. And as always with these reports, they're either routine or they're alarming. So I'm glad they're routine in that situation. Any other questions, colleagues? The recommendations are at paragraph 7.1. It's recommended that the tax base for 25-26 as detailed in the report be approved, that properties in prescribed classes A and B, i.e. second homes, the council continues to apply a nil discount. For properties prescribed in class C, i.e. empty properties, the council continues to apply a nil discount, and that the formal statutory information will be issued with the council tax demand notices. Is everyone happy with that report? Show of hands. That's carried. Thank you very much, Nigel. Brings us to agenda item 8, which is the Shared Prosperity Fund, the Town Centre work stream. Jo, do you want to start on this one?
Thank you, Anthony. So Torfaen received an allocation from the UK Government Shared Prosperity Fund of around 19 million in autumn 22. This current programme will conclude at the end of this financial year. If approved today, the proposal will see an allocation for town centre projects from shared prosperity funding to upgrade the sewerage network at Hanbury Road and Commercial Streets, allowing future generation projects to progress. The detailed design work for the Levelling Up Fund projects in Pontypool has highlighted a capacity issue with the sewerage network in that area, and without an upgrade to the sewerage network, future regeneration projects are likely to be limited. Whilst Welsh Water have engaged in discussions with officers, they will not be investing in the required sewerage upgrade. If members approve the report today, then Welsh Water would manage the contract to upgrade the sewerage network, including appointing a contractor and an independent cost consultancy. The programme for the sewerage work would commence in the new year and is estimated to take up to 10 weeks. Unfortunately, works will require the closure of Hanbury Road for a prolonged period of time and would see traffic diversions in place. Officers have had preliminary discussions with local bus companies to provide alternative routes and drop-off and pick-up points. And I'll hand to Dave Leach, the Strategic Director for Adults and Communities, to give more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. So the introduction from Councillor Gordon there covered the key points in terms of this report. This is critical, really, that the sewage network is upgraded to enable any future regeneration activity to take place across Commercial Street, Hanbury Road. It's something that we've been in discussions with Welsh Water about for some time. It enters into that challenging territory where the sewage network wouldn't attract traditional investment from Welsh Water through their programme at this point in time, because it's not at the point of failure, but to enable additional activity to take place obviously does require that investment. So we're in a position as an authority where Welsh now, the Shared Prosperity Fund Town Centre project does give us an opportunity to address this and address it in a way that will allow regeneration activity then to project to enable that to happen. It's a slightly different way of us contracting than we would normally do. We will essentially be issuing the funds to Welsh Water. Welsh Water will then manage that contract our insistence that further investigation works are undertaken, particularly to try and mitigate some of that risk. So the risks to us as an authority of proceeding with this project are essentially costs may overrun depending on what happens once the Welsh Water contractors start to get under the ground. The way for us to manage that essentially is there is a contingency budget allocated within the contract, and as part of the figures presented to you in the report, an additional contingency fund there to enable us to address any unforeseens. That, coupled with the level of detailed design that's been done, mitigates but does not remove that risk altogether. I'm conscious Councillor Gordon also mentioned that there will need to be a road closure. We've explored every other option to try and avoid having to have a road closure, but unfortunately, because of the direction where that sewer runs, the gradients and the fact that the downhill run does go along the line of the road, there is no way that that sewer could be diverted in any other way that would avoid that road crossing. So we have looked at whether that could take place through the park, but again, because of the gradients, it's simply not a practical solution for us to do. What we have said, though, is we'll work with Welsh Water and the contractors to make sure that any road closure is kept to the absolute minimum that will be required. So although a road closure application will go in for a prolonged period of time, we'll be seeking to complete the works well within that time, and ideally within half the time of the road closure that's been put forward. If the project doesn't proceed, that does cause issues for future regeneration activity within this area of Pontypool, and that's why we, on balance, would be recommending commitment of the SPF resource to the project.
Thanks both. Any questions? Fee.
No, thank you. You did partially actually answer one of my questions, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm struggling to understand why Welsh Water, and you've made co-investment, you're not asking them to invest all on their own, but they won't co-invest for something that actually is their own asset as well, bearing in mind that it states that prohibiting further redevelopment of the area if it wasn't.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and a question that we've asked of Welsh Water to understand why the position that they're taking is that because the condition of the sewer currently isn't in a position where it would attract investment through their normal programme, that means that they're not looking to invest in it going forward. The argument that we've put forward is that at some stage, that sewerage network will require investment, and this was a way to enable us to co-fund that investment in advance. That's not an argument that Welsh Water have accepted at this point. Given the urgency for us in terms of delivering regeneration activity in the town, we were faced with the decision of, do we go ahead with this project now, yes or no? But I think it's a fair challenge.
Okay, thank you. Disappointing. The other question I have as well, if I can, is well, it's not really a question; it's a statement. Because again, you've sort of semi-answered the question in terms of road closures, and I was concerned about the impact to local businesses and the community accessing local services. But from what you've said in your briefing, there's little we can do. But in terms of what we have done is to explore all the different options. But I'm assuming we're going to promote as much as possible to help communities understand that we're doing the best that we can during this time of upheaval.
Absolutely right. So key in our mind in terms of the timing and phasing of this was to make sure that we were trying to pursue any road closures after any sort of Christmas period, so into the new year, to try and minimise the impact on any businesses. There will still be access into the town centre, that's important to say. It's not a complete closure of road access into the town centre. It will just come from the other direction. We've worked with the contractors and with Welsh Water, as we say, to try and minimise the amount of road closures and the length of time of that road closure. And yes, we've explored every other option. What we will also look to do then is to promote the activity that takes place in town through our comms team in conjunction with this project. We've invested considerable amounts of the Shared Prosperity Fund Town Centre pot in activities in the town centre, so events activities delivered through some of our partners in the community to try and put on an increasing amount of footfall attracting activity in the run-up to Christmas, in the knowledge that a project like this may go ahead. So whilst again we can't remove the concern, I think we've done what we can to be able to mitigate the impact that that's going to have.
Okay, any other questions, colleagues? So it seems like the reality of the situation is that we either invest in this or effectively block off development in that area of the town centre. For everyone, as Fiona says, it's disappointing that Welsh Water won't co-invest, but at least they're helping us to try and minimise the costs, and as long as we do everything we can to minimise the disruption, I think it's, seems to me to be the only choice available to us, really. Okay, no more questions then? The recommendations then are at paragraph 9.1 to request that Cabinet approve an adjustment to the project's allocated funds within the Shared Prosperity Fund Town Centre Work Programme as set out in this report. Show of hands in favour? That's carried. Thank you to Dave and to Joe. Okay, we're on then to item number 9, which is the draft waste education enforcement policy. Sue, do you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, pleased to bring to you today a draft waste education and enforcement policy. As we all know, a key part of our response to the climate nature emergency is to reduce waste and maximise recycling, and we align ourselves with Welsh governments towards zero waste strategy. But in 2021-22 and 22-23, Torfaen failed to hit the 64% recycling target, and so we introduced a strategic improvement programme, working with our communities to raise the rate. And the good news is that we achieved 64% recycling in 23-24. However, as we knew it would, the target has increased to 70% in 24-25. And these targets may seem ambitious, but we know from a recent study that around 60% of waste that we throw out in purple-lidded bins in Torfaen could have been recycled. And that's especially true for food waste. We are doing and will continue to do everything we can to support people in their efforts to recycle. If our residents are doing their best, we will do ours to help them. Recycling can be a bit complicated as reprocessing facilities vary across Wales and are still developing, so we understand if people make honest mistakes. But in fairness to all those doing their best, We need a policy to describe the steps we take if people repeatedly fail to recycle. And I would add that when we've consulted people, the majority support the idea that there should be these enforcement steps should they be needed in the last resort. So that's why this report seeks Cabinet approval for the introduction of a waste education and enforcement policy with a strong focus on the first. Officers have identified an approach that's been used in other areas called Keeping Up with the Joneses as our preferred model for Torfaen. And evidence suggests that this approach will help us towards improved recycling in a fair and a positive way. I'm going to hand over to Mark Thomas now to talk us through the detail. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. As Councillor Moore has said, the purpose of the report is to seek Cabinet approval for the waste education enforcement policy, which is obviously appended to the report. Going forward, obviously, Torfaen commenced a public consultation in 2023 to gather views on how best to increase recycling performance. It was clear that we really needed to engage on a program of behaviour change as an initial way to take our communities forward with us, to embrace that recycling journey that we're upon. Obviously, that engagement process then forms part of Workstream 5 within the wider Raise the Rates campaign. Section 4 just details, really. Waste enforcement isn't entirely a new concept. In November 2007, Torfaen approved the enforcement procedure for household waste and recycling offences. The procedure focused on incorrect presentation of non-recyclable waste such as side waste and top hatting. January 2022, scrutiny was consulted on a proposed programme of enforcement in relation to residents who are not recycling. Scrutiny felt that a number of steps needed to be undertaken prior to us engaging in that process. Those improvements have been made, so for example, introducing segregation of cardboard, procurement of a new fleet of recycling vehicles, and public surveys relating to participation. So all those measures have been in place. But the focus really should be on seeking behavioural change, not enforcement first, and that aligns with our sort of strategy going forwards in all enforcement measures, really. The Waste Education Enforcement Policy does not replace or supersede the overarching Public Protection Services Enforcement and Compliance Policy, which just underpins it. And there are key principles within that existing policy, as I said, about fairness, but also looking at potential people at risk as well before we just blindly go into the enforcement process. So there's key issues already there to protect vulnerable adults and our community. As Councillor Morgan said, we've taken advice from RAP and other authorities, and Keeping Up with the Joneses approach is obviously supported by RAP, but also is deemed to be successfully introduced in other local authorities, most noticeably Blaenau Gwent, which is obviously on our borders, and we're working closely with at the moment. The next sections of Section 4 really just focus on the positive impact of the engagement and enforcement campaign on the whole county borough, not just on the properties visited, and that's sort of the lessons that we've learned from other authorities. And obviously 412, 413 covers on very few of the initial improvement letters to people who aren't complying. Will actually progress to FPNs as the process successfully encourages that change in behaviour. Section 414 and 415, 416 really just covers the four-step approach of the Keeping Up with the Joneses initiative. And as you can see, there's a lot of work that is undertaken and engagement with residents before we even think about issuing a fixed penalty notice to the residents. And again, 415 just reiterates that we will be looking at extenuating circumstances before considering any fixed planting notices. As you can see, Section 5 covers a wide range of consultation that we've undertaken with developing the recycling waste strategy, obviously, and the engagement enforcement policy. We presented it to scrutiny on the 18th of July of 2024, which is really, really useful to get a lot of feedback and recommendations. And obviously we had a member seminar in November as well, which was widely attended and was very, very productive. Members are involved in the production of these letters as well that we're going to send to residents. So there's no surprises. When we're confident we'll have full member support in terms of any actions undertaken. Section 6 covers obviously implications and resources, including an options appraisal to determine the most appropriate engagement and enforcement method, which we determined to be the keeping up with the Joneses model. Whilst the costs associated with the introduction of the enforcement team, there will be costs, there are also potential savings from the reduction of residual waste and therefore reduce operating costs. As such, if this policy is approved, the team and associated costs will be funded from reserves for 1 year, with a review undertaken thereafter to determine the effectiveness of the team and the potential for ongoing funding of the team through reduced disposal costs. Again, this process will be, the effectiveness of this approach will be monitored, and 6.7 gives the main key points in how we will monitor our performance going forward. Section 7 then gives an indicative timetable subject to approval by Cabinet of how we proceed to introduce this initiative. And the recommendations are set out in Section 8. And that concludes my overview of the report. Okay.
Thank you both. Any questions, colleagues? Mandy?
I just a plea really when we go out and we start this policy, if it is approved now, is to make sure that we use as much comms as possible leading up to it, not just hitting it as they go, you know, the officers knock the doors, you know, do a comms thing to let people know this is coming, so we can, you know, we've been caught on the hop, haven't we, with the last couple of things we've tried to put through, so it's just make sure we get as much communication as possible.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's a very good point. And as I say, we've learned sometimes the hard way in terms of comms being essential to give as much forewarning as possible.
Okay. Thanks. I'm certainly drawn to 4.3 in the report, which just shows that 56% of people are in favour. I guess that reflects the frustrations that we've seen in different consultations from people who are doing their bit to try and recycle. But they see other people on their street not bothering. So I think that's the sort of the push for me, as well as, of course, the fact that, you know, residual waste costs more money to deal with. It's, you know, environmentally not sustainable. And if we're losing out on things like food waste that can be put to good use generating power, then it seems a bit of a win-win to try and push on more. 4.14, I think, is very instructive, and perhaps ask you to sort of expand on that table there of the different steps. This certainly isn't enforcement first. This is enforcement last, at the end of a long line of things that we'll do to try and engage people, to help them. 4.15 talks about helping vulnerable people. I think that's important, because there may be reasons why people may struggle. If they're not sort of typical residents, for example, if they've got particular challenges in their life, particular vulnerabilities, so just make sure we stick to that one. But yeah, my first question was about expanding on that. The other thing I was going to ask about was Section 6. Obviously, there's the options appraisal there, and getting that balance right between doing this properly but proportionately. I think 6.8, I think, is compelling for me, that we take a year, take a look at it, and then then reconsider. That would seem to be a sensible way to take it forward. So yeah, my main questions were about that and about 4.14. I think that's worth expanding on.
Thank you, Leader. If I may just come back to reiterate what you were saying there, this four-step process. It's really important that we are clear with people that those seeking to recycle in good faith have absolutely nothing to fear from this process, that this is very much about educate, engage and support for all those who are willing to work with us. And the safeguards in this and the very, very low numbers of fixed penalty notices that have resulted in other council areas is a testament to that, and that will be the approach here. So we really do not want anyone that is putting their recycling out in good faith and may just have made a mistake or just be unclear as to how something is done, has absolutely nothing to fear from this. This is the absolutely will not recycle people that might very, very rarely occasionally receive a fixed penalty notice, not those who are acting in good faith.
Thank you. Yeah, the appended policy is there as well to show and demonstrate exactly how officers will operate. So it's clear, concise, and we want to be consistent, albeit obviously with the one proviso that we will always be aware of vulnerable adults as well as we progress through the policy. Which is to say, the main one really would be teams of engagement officers knocking on doorsteps, building that relationship with residents as well to educate. Really, that's the first element, and that's the most important one that we're looking at the moment. Obviously, we will have that. The procedure will have obviously a circular leaflet, a reminder letter. And again, it's constant engagement with the residents. And then step 3, and only step 3, will be issue of a section 46 notice. That's only if the household is still not complying with the previous letters and engagement that we've undertaken. And obviously then, it will only then progress to step 4 for a fixed penalty notice. So yeah, there's a lot of work and a lot of time and effort and letters that will be shared going forward before we go to the fixed penalty notice. There is a disputes regime as well. So if residents feel they're hard done by or would be unfair, they're able to dispute that and challenge that as well. So we've done as much as we can to be fair and consistent.
Thanks. That just shows we will bend over backwards, but at the end of the day, we've got a duty to the people who are doing their best to pursue these things. I think it's worth discussing this today because I've seen in other areas where they've had enforcement policies, you get people saying, all I did was put one tin can in my bins and now they're fining me. That's not what will happen. Much in a way, I guess, that when the police stop people, I've only had a pint officer honest. We need to sort of say that, sometimes that can't be taken at face value, so we will go through all those steps to engage with people, remind them, issue the notice before the last resort of the fixed penalty notice.
Thank you, Leader. That's key. Once the policy falls into disrepute with the public, we've lost them, and this process is all about hearts and minds of the public to take them with us. We are adamant. We've given an undertaking. We have a contract with our communities to work hard with them and to engage with them, to engage in an education to drive recycling forward. I see parallels here from the early days of civil park enforcement, where they've a very robust commercial approach was taken, and councils quickly had to change their approach, and we're keen not to repeat those mistakes in this instance.
Okay, right. If colleagues are content, the recommendations are at paragraph 8. We're asked to approve the adoption and implementation of the Waste Enforcement Education Policy. We're asked to approve the recommended operating model, which is option 3. We're asked to approve the proposal to fund the implementation from corporate reserves in year 1. And lastly, we're asked to note the ongoing approach to reviewing the effectiveness and future funding of the model and delegate authority to the executive member to take the decision should a revised approach be required. Is everyone happy to approve? That's passed. Thank you for the reports. We now move on to item number 10, which is the procurement, operation and management of the HWRC. Again, Sue, do you want to introduce this?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this procurement for the operation and management of the Household Waste Recycling Centre and the transfer station at Pantig Way, New Inn, Pontypool. So it's a fairly straightforward report here. We're looking to appoint an appropriate provider for the operation and management of the centre in New Inn. Obviously, provision of a household recycling centre and operations of the waste transfer station are essential if we're going to discharge our statutory obligations. The current contract for the operation and management is due to expire on the 31st of March 2025, and so there's been an open procurement process for a new contract, and we have now a recommendation for decision, and I'll ask Mark just to go over the details of that process that gave rise to this recommendation. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. There's not much else to add, really, other than to advise that the contract is due to commence, as I say, in April 2025. It will be for a period of 5 years, with an option for the authority to extend for a further 3 years at annual intervals. Obviously, the tenders have been evaluated using an approved evaluation framework, allocating weightings for pricing, quality and social value, which are detailed in sections 4. The only other issue is obviously section 7, which is risk. I suppose is if the contract's not awarded, we'll have to rely on our current contractor to operate without a contract, and that's obviously a risk to the authority in terms of value for money. And if we don't continue to operate our household waste recycling centre, then we'll be in breach of our statutory duties. So it's essential that we do secure a partner to run those operations. Section 8 really covers the following approval of the contract. The contract be awarded, as I say, for 5 years, and then a 3 possible year extension. Number 9, section 9 will obviously service performance will be detailed within the contract documents and measured and monitored through a formal contract monitoring procedure. There are penalties for failure to meet the required operational targets. And that concludes the summary.
Thanks. Questions, colleagues? Welcome those performance measures within the contract and also the social value aspects of it too. Obviously, it's disappointing that only one tender was received. Does that tend to be typical in this sort of area, or is there anything we can do to make sure generally we get more tenders? Because it meets all the criteria. So, but obviously, open competition is a good thing for these things. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a full tender process was undertaken. It's often commercial decisions at the time when we do tender. Yeah, but it's clear that whilst we can't go into the financials within this forum, it's clear that the tenders within the sort of stated financial envelope. So we're content that we are achieving value for money.
Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? If not, the recommendations of this report are at paragraph 11. It's recommended that contractor A be awarded the contract for managing the household waste recycling centre and transfer station at New Inn. Are we all happy to agree? Thank you. That's agreed. Move on then to agenda item 11, which is the Torvine Community Wellbeing Strategy on Sports and Leisure. If I hand over initially to Fiona.
Thank you, Leader. Let Beth get down here. Not that it'll be a race. I'll still be talking. This report is an additional chapter to the Community Wellbeing Strategy, which provides the Council a strategic framework for supporting communities and promoting wellbeing. The Council approved the Wellbeing Strategy for 23-27 last year, and this report aligns with the Council's County Plan, Future Generations Act, and as we're very proudly, a Marmot Council. We want to do things differently, think radically, and put communities, well-being and prevention at the heart of how we design and support communities and residents. Sports and leisure, as many will know in this room, I'm rather keen on clubs and activities. So running is my big thing, but they contribute so much, all of the different activities out there, to so many elements of our well-being. Being more active more often can support our well-being, connect us with our communities, reducing loneliness, and other many physical health issues that it can either help prevent or reduce. So I'm naturally a big fan. The strategy changes our position from a facilitator to an active player. The strategy proposes that we secure investment with partners and providers, hold to account any commissioned leisure services and emphasise the needs of our communities, offer our comms out to sports clubs so we can further promote their impact, connect clubs with schools, GPs and social care, focus on data, sharing this with clubs so that they know what works best in terms of further developing their wellbeing offers, and design targeted prevention services together. The strategy sets out the changes we want to support and the impact alongside a performance framework. I'll leave at least a little bit for Beth to say about. So I'll go past that bit and just talk about the consultation. The consultation had 219 responses. That's actually a good response rate. The feedback that we had from people as to the barriers, the main barriers I'm going to say here, but the three here are poor current health and fitness being a barrier to getting involved in activity, awareness of the available activities, and anxiety about meeting people and not being as good, which is, when I hear the latter one, an awful lot. So there are things that we could do as a council to try and address these. And I can't, it is in the report, but I wouldn't let it be missed off either. The value of volunteering within our sports and communities, our sports and clubs and communities in that respect. Volunteering has a huge impact on our well-being as well. To give to others, again, connecting, developing others. So that's a really important part of this as well, and a valued element. TCBC want to become an active player, not a passive spectator. I believe the community should lead and have a positive and impactful, make a positive and impactful difference for our communities by coordinating and enhancing the opportunities available. And now I'll let Beth get a word in edgeways.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. I think probably you've covered quite an extensive amount, so I will just add in sort of some key points. But as Councillor Cross has outlined, the strategy is there to sort of be set within the context of some of those key strategic frameworks around our county plan and the Marmot principles, essentially around delivering a more equitable and sustainable community that is also more healthy and well. The strategy itself is a chapter, as we've outlined, of the main community wellbeing strategy and therefore aligns with many of those principles. As we know, we're seeing a widening gap in health outcomes between the more and less deprived parts of Torfaen, and a widening gap between life expectancy and a healthy life expectancy, which is leading to growing demand and complexity of need presenting. Critically, sports and leisure and the clubs that sort of support that agenda play a critical part in how we sort of tackle and seek to identify solutions for it. I think it's important to note, integral to delivering the agenda and built on the premise that this isn't a strategy that the Council can deliver independently. It is very much, as Councillor Cross has outlined, around collaborative approach, including the strengths of community and local groups within that. Section 4.2 of the report sets out how we would achieve that collectively. There are 6 key areas within the strategy in terms of how and what we're hoping to achieve over its lifetime. And for me, it covers those critical elements in terms of how we develop more opportunity for the majority of residents to sort of become more active and participate in sport and leisure, but also recognising, celebrating and growing aspiration and potential within the borough also. So it comes at it from those two angles and very much on a collaborative approach. Consultation, as Councillor Cross has outlined, has been undertaken, and there's some key strands that have come forward in terms of people's reasons for participating or not participating in sports and leisure, and also around volunteering, many of which are already reflected in the strategy, but there is probably more work to build upon that. And one example is the opportunity to do further engagement with young people to understand their reasons for choosing to engage or not engage with sports and leisure, and to ensure that's appropriately reflective in the activities we take forward. And then finally, in terms of the actions to be taken forward, as outlined in section 7, the sports and leisure team will take the initial lead in implementing the strategy and associated reporting, but that will be based on the foundation of engagement with key stakeholders as we move forward. The document that's been presented as an appendices today will be made into a more graphical version that can be sort of made available more publicly, and it will be supported by a high level of communication and engagement plan to ensure that throughout the lifetime of that strategy that we revisit those conversations to ensure it remains relevant to the needs of our community. So therefore, it's recommended that Cabinet approves the Community Wellbeing Strategy, Sports and Leisure.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Fiona. Any questions on this? I really welcome this report. I think it's great that it explicitly puts sport and leisure participation at the heart of that challenge that we face to bridge that healthy life expectancy gap. I think very often sport's seen as something that people who are sporty do, when actually its real power can be when it's put at the heart of building a healthier community, making people less lonely, the social interactions people get from leisure, the mental and physical health benefits that they get from that as well, and also, of course, the central part of that is a preventative service for keeping people out of the grips of health services as well whenever possible. I think we can. I guess our question is how we apply that day to day. For example, we've got new 3G pitches coming online over the next 12 months. I guess the question is how do we make sure we use those pitches to attract new people to activities, not just get the same people using them. And I say that as a football coach and someone who would be one of the same old people using them. How do we make sure we use those facilities, not just to be things that are there for people who love sport, but also to encourage other people to get there. I guess the other question about that is barriers and confidence. I remember being involved in cycling projects before and realising that I was perhaps the last person who should be encouraging new people who are very nervous about riding their bikes, because they'll take one look at people and think that, you know, that it's a certain level of participation or nothing, when actually it's just about building that confidence and getting people over those sort of barriers. Very much echo what Fiona said about volunteers as well, as being central to this. I know from junior sports how much they rely on people giving up their own time to help other people participate. I know that's true in lots of adult groups as well. You know, Parkrun's a great example of that. You know, just a few volunteers can help put on something that lots of people can enjoy week in, week out, and can build their confidence in, whether they're running 15-minute 5Ks or 60-minute 5Ks, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I'm really glad to see that this sort of builds something at the heart of that challenge to address that healthy life expectancy gap.
Yeah, I guess in terms of that connection, there's two elements, isn't there? So sort of for some of our more vulnerable, there will be the opportunity to utilise things like community connectors to make those initial links, to be that sort of hand-holding for a limited period, to just find that confidence. I think your point around sort of bringing in sports, and we're coming at it from two levels. So there is one that is around that aspiration, so actually where children, young people, adults have got that potential, how do we sort of really motivate and ensure that that's not lost? Critically, I think there is an opportunity where we can look at that community championing. So we talk about, you know, it's not always about excelling at the highest level, but actually if somebody is engaged locally, that they can really champion and bring people on in terms of encouraging them to participate at whatever level is appropriate to them. So there's definitely something around that. And then the sports pitches, I know there's sort of tentative conversations already happening. around how do we do that in a sort of collective way with our partners to ensure that whatever system is put in place sort of operates across a whole sort of Torfaen and is proportionate to need, to avoid that situation that you've outlined. So that'll be a piece of work that the team will take forward in the next financial year.
Of course, the other key partners in this are the Health Board. How do we get into the Health Board? I've worked a bit with sort of green social prescribing before, getting people out into the environment, but there's also sort of the sporting or the leisure social prescribing. Are we communicating with the Health Boards that they encourage their practitioners to suggest to people things like the Couch to 5K and things like that, that rather than just prescribing them more tablets, they can prescribe them opportunities to get more active to overcome some health problems?
Yeah, so I think those conversations are already happening, and I know sort of Dave, as strategic director, continues to build on those conversations with health, but yeah, it's a critical part of it in terms of the early intervention prevention model that we're looking to embed, and that isn't, again, just a council approach, that is us and our partners working collaboratively. So again, there will be opportunities to further engage with them. And there are examples where our sports and leisure team, for example, are already taking forward sort of smaller scale projects that do tie in their outcomes and their performance with health sort of conditions, so that it's that correlation, so we can sort of demonstrate, I guess, impact as opposed to just delivering activity, which is nice to do. It's impactful, that's having an effect on bringing down some of those concerns and demands in the system.
Just to provide a little bit of additional reassurance based on a discussion yesterday as well at the ISPBs, that's the Integrated Services Partnership Board, where that wellbeing system is discussed with health. We actually had a specific conversation on National Exercise Referral Scheme and on community sport to look at ways that the Health Board through GPs networks can start to boost engagement with that as a social prescribing model. The action taken away from that is that the Health Board are going to take that into the NCNs, which is the clusters of GPs, to start to look at how they can encourage more people to participate in sport rather than prescribe medication. So those discussions, very timely, have started this week.
That's great to hear, thank you. Sue?
Yeah, just looking for reassurances, I suppose, around the edges of the programme, where play meets leisure, where green space meets more formal provision of sports facilities. I think being really hyper aware of how this all interconnects with community activity and life in people's communities is really important. For example, organising an event on a sports field is a wonderful thing to do, but it can be very frustrating for residents when they see people coming to exercise in SUVs and parking all over their green spaces and blocking their driveways. So those sorts of community-led, community-supported, wider considerations, I think, will help to get that message in. And if we use our active travel officers with their expertise around encouraging people who don't live very far away to walk or cycle to those sorts of events, we can prevent those kind of frictions sort of throwing any kind of spanner in the works. I think it's just that integration with other aspects of council responsibilities and being sensitive to community needs across the board that will really make this successful.
And I think for me that just ties in with the wider community and wellbeing strategy that's already been approved, and that principle that it doesn't sit within a given service area. It's a whole council approach, whole partner approach, and those principles should be embedded in whichever way is appropriate to ensure activity can take place that isn't detrimental to another part of the system. So I think that's probably the principles are there. It's about that working out to build on that, make sure we're engaging internally as much as we are externally with groups.
Thank you all for that. Are we all happy to move to the recommendations then? It's recommended that Cabinet approves the Community and Wellbeing Strategy, Sports and Leisure. Is it paragraph 8? Are we all happy? Great, and I look forward to that taking shape and perhaps reporting back in the future on how it's all going. Okay, that's now done. So item 12 is the updated Housing Support Programme Strategy Review. Dave, you coming in first on this one before Simon comes in?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Firstly, apologies for not being there in person. I'm attending a disability rights day event in Cwmbran at the moment, and I'm going to be speaking in a sec, so I might have to shoot off shortly after this. So the HSG, the Housing Support Grant, is a Welsh Government grant which funds the housing support and homelessness prevention services that local authorities provide, either directly or through commissioning as an external provider. As part of this funding stream, we're required to establish a 4-year housing support programme strategy to detail how we intend on delivering these services and how we'll provide an effective response to the various housing-related pressures that we're experiencing locally. This report today elaborates on the formation of the strategy and outlines the strategic priorities that we agreed on in consultation with local partners. Those priorities are listed in 4.5 of the report, and I believe they represent the most fundamental housing needs and pressures that we're seeing right now. Members will note in the report that the HSG has received an uplift from Welsh Government for this financial year. This is obviously very welcome. However, I would still remind members that funding for HSG services remain a concern, as some providers struggle to find and retain staff with the level of wages they're able to offer. At this point, I'll go off my script and refer back to comments earlier from Sue around national insurance and the impact on providers. This is very much pertinent to HSG. Obviously, we commission those services, and they're all third sector organisations, and they're all at the moment currently subject to that national insurance increase, employers' contribution. That is of significant concern, and obviously we will be waiting, like many other councils, charities, looking for an indication from UK government as to whether it applies to them or whether any support will be offered, because HSG is really, the Housing Support Grant has really been struggling over the years anyway, with just the amount of grants able to give to those charities, and subsequently the amount of salary they're able to offer for those positions is just falling far short of what is needed. And we have been finding in very uncomfortable circumstances that some staff members from those providers have had to seek support from services like food banks themselves. So whilst the uplift is very much welcome, we need that uplift continued for subsequent years to come, and we need clarity on that national insurance increase. So back to script. So as I was saying, if the true potential of HSG is going to be realised, Welsh Government need to commit to those further increases in future budgets. Today, however, we were asked to approve the Housing Support Programme strategy. A huge amount of work has gone into putting this together. And before I hand over to Simon to fill in the detail, I'd like to thank Simon, Sophie and all the other officers and partners who've been involved with establishing the programme we have in front of us. There's an awful lot of work that's gone into this, and this is intermittent throughout the year. We have lots of strategy meetings where we consult with partners and check in with partners that we're still on track and still making the most of this grant. So there's a lot more work behind this than simply this report. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. Appreciate the recognition on the team there in terms of the efforts they make. I'm not intending to go through the strategy verbatim, you'll be pleased to note. I just want to pick up on some of the salient points that are in the report, really, highlighting some of the key findings that we have that are consistent in essence. However, just to rewind a little, this strategy is a requirement for us to produce on a 4-yearly cycle, and partway through that, we have to do this review. So the document has been reviewed. It has taken into account a number of elements of feedback that we've had from a number of different quarters and sessions that we've had, evidence that we've gathered from a range of sources that are cited in the report and the strategic document. However, the key findings continue to come forward as looking at that lack of supported accommodation that we have. Despite us actually almost doubling the number of supported units we have in Torfaen over the last 5 years, there still is a lack of supply, and we recognise that, and we recognise that we need to be a little bit more creative about bringing new units to the fore. we all know about the financial hardship that's in place in our communities and residents, and that's coming across loud and clear from partners in terms of what they're faced with day to day, in terms of those individuals they're supporting. So that's another key finding that we've found, that the financial hardship and pressures on it, households seeking our services are still there, and whilst they're not growing significantly, are still a pressure on individuals. What we've seen, and predominantly since as coming out of the pandemic, is that growth in complex needs and individuals with multiple needs. It was a pressure before, but it's even more prevalent now. We have a range of individuals who have multiple needs presenting, where there's very, very complex backgrounds, complex to work with, complex to engage with, and we're trying to find solutions for those individuals in terms of getting their engagement, which comes back into the next key finding that we found, that there is a disengagement with services, that individuals are not able to maintain that engagement. And we tried to unpick that in terms of the work that we're doing, trying to get underneath the root cause as to why individuals disengage with support services that we're providing, disengage with agencies, and get lost in systems. And we found out a lot of the work that we need to now refocus on is around that early intervention and preventative work. I think it was alluded to earlier in the meeting and the presentation earlier that Beth provided, that early intervention and prevention is a key activity for us to be looking at. And we're embarking on a number of methods there in that arena to try and tackle homelessness at its root cause. So in terms of then the strategic priorities, they haven't really changed much in terms of the review. What we're still looking to do is review and develop that supported accommodation offer that I referred to earlier, strengthening that link around mental health provision and how we work with mental health services out in the community, how we make sure that individuals are provided with the right support at the right time to get the right outcome is critical. And we're enhancing that early intervention activity and provision that we have. We're also keen to strengthen some of the work that's done around domestic abuse, around the Wilder SV directive that's in place. And within that, what we're trying to do is also embed Welsh Government's approach around rapid rehousing at the heart of what we're trying to deliver here. And we've had some good success in terms of some of the provision. I've previously spoken to members around how we've really reduced the waiting times that people have in temporary accommodation, and that we continue to strive to drive those down. Part of the work we do involves monitoring our providers that we commission with and that we contract with. And that's done on a regular basis. It's done in a partnership and collaborative approach. It's not done on a punitive level. It's done to make sure that partners are able to deliver on the key outcomes that we're contracting. And we're very flexible there in that what we do is we have very open dialogues with our providers to shape, reshape and reformat the provision that we've got in those contracts so that we're very responsive to changing need. What we're really, really keen to do is build on that collaborative approach that we have, that we want to join those services together. And with the onset of services such as Pearl House over the road and the accommodation hub, that is really setting our stall out in terms of how we want it to work in a collaborative manner across the borough. And that is where we're seeing the benefits, and that's where we're seeing the differences that we're making on the ground. We're also keen to make sure that we're investing in that workforce, that we're making that workforce fit for now and fit for the future. So there's a lot of training that we provide through Housing Support Grant for our providers to make sure that they're able to deliver on the ground and that we're able to foster an approach of collaborative working within that. So effectively the training that's delivered is done for all. It's not done for one agency, it's open for every agency that we contract with, and also we bring in our internal services where and when appropriate. The other thing that we're keen to work on is how we strengthen the access to our provision. Again, I cite Pearl House as a prime example of that, but also how we're changing a lot of our models of working and how we're changing how we have the touchdown points for individuals to access services and support, and trying to use technology as most effectively we can, but also make sure that we've still got that in-person facility available. So, I guess in terms of just wrapping up and pulling things together, what this process is around is setting our stall out in terms of how we're going to tackle the housing and support needs across the county borough. Touches on a wide range of individuals, wide range of issues, across a wide range of, put my teeth in now, range of agencies. What we're very keen to have at the heart of it is our approach around partnership working. And that hopefully comes out from the strategic document that we put in there, that is front and foremost in our mind. We can't resolve the housing and support needs and the needs of our communities if we're working alone and in silos. We've got to work together, and that is part and parcel for what we're trying to do. And I think that's proven to be successful over time. So we're wanting to continue and build on that success that we've got. So from the report today, we're looking for, or the request is for Cabinet to consider the strategic document that's been provided, contents in the report, and to consider adopting that reviewed strategy.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Dave. Any questions, colleagues? Peter.
Thank you. Simon, I was interested in what you were saying about domestic violence. I attended a police commissioner's event on Friday, and they were telling us at that event that domestic abuse incidents against women and girls is a big spike at the moment, and it's at all-time high. Is that being reflected in the demand that's coming your way?
I'd have to check the figures to give you a full picture on that, but from what the team are telling me on the ground, it's not really rising significantly in terms of our case numbers that are coming through and the representation that are there in terms of percentage-wise. Whether that's rising in terms of contacts that we don't get elsewhere, I'm not too sure, but we're not seeing that coming through our doors. But I can come back to you with more figures around what we have.
Thank you.
I really welcome that report that we've doubled supportive accommodation over the last, how many years is that?
5 years.
Over the last 5 years, it's quite an achievement by the team, so thank you for your hard work on that, but obviously still there's the demand there. I'm just interested in that point about disengagement, because quite often as members we get approached with individual cases as if there's a very simple solution to something, when usually it's particularly complex. You mentioned sort of mental health support as one way, and trying to build systems, I guess, around people, isn't it, rather than expecting people to adapt to systems. I guess the more we can do with that, the better, but that requires resource.
Yeah, engagement with individuals in this arena is often very difficult to maintain. A lot comes back to those skills that those support workers have. And that's why we invest a lot in terms of delivering training to those individuals around what's called a psychologically informed approach, often referred to as PI. That's how you have that conversation with individuals to develop that relationship. And that's where we've seen the greatest success. We still get disengagement from individuals. Purely, I put it down to a lot of the chaotic lifestyles that individuals have, and sometimes the expectations that are there in terms of what can be achieved, and having sometimes a little bit of patience in terms of some of the processes that have to happen, particularly when you're dealing with external agencies such as DWP, HMPPS and others, and trying to coordinate that. That can be very difficult, and people get frustrated with those systems and things that are there. We do as professionals, I'm sure others do around the housing systems as well, that we have there. What we're trying to do in terms of improving that connection with individuals is have more open, transparent and honest conversations up front about what the expectations are. So it's very much about changing some of that dialogue so that we can manage some of those expectations, but also give reassurance to individuals as to how we're working and what we can achieve and what their role is in that. Housing Support Grant is about empowering individuals, and the role of support workers is to empower. It's not to do it for them, it's to put individuals on a footing that they can cope independently. So it's about making sure that individuals are going on that transient path and that they're working with us. And support workers have got some fantastic success in terms of the stuff on the ground that I see day to day. And that's really embedded in that psychologically informed approach, and that really is reaping benefits. But there still is that disengagement, and that comes back to something that's symptomatic with how we work as agencies, that we don't communicate some things very well at times, and we need to change some of that. And that's what we're trying to do.
And sometimes we can't communicate things, I guess, because we can't force people to engage, but neither would we want to broadcast that an individual is not engaging. I know Dave wants to come in.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because as Simon said, there's all sorts of different reasons. Myriad reasons why someone might choose not to engage or just fall off the radar completely. But I take the view that it's our job, even though it's the reasons are the individuals. It's our job to try and tailor to those individual reasons, because like a lot of things, that demand doesn't go away, it just grows. It grows and gets more complex, and as a result, if we're being cold and clinical, gets more expensive. So I think a good example of this, and I've plenty of first-hand experience of this now, is some homeless individuals that we've had. It's been very difficult to engage for a number of reasons, often mental health reasons, sometimes entrenched lifestyle reasons. And I think that I do refer to it quite often, and there's a good reason for it. But Pearl House, I think, is the remedy to that, or a potential remedy to that, because that offers a more tailored response to those individuals, where previously that wasn't necessarily the case. I mean, it was an attempt to, but I think this is a more structural kind of way of meeting them where they're at. So I think that sort of approach is more likely to have longer term success with those individuals with specific needs. So yeah, it's really just to say that I think the onus is always on us. It feels very difficult sometimes, and I really do sympathise with staff, because sometimes they are tearing their hair out because they really do want to help some people, but it's really difficult unless those individuals want that help. We can't force that. So yeah, you do have to have a tremendous amount of patience, I think, if you're working in housing and homelessness, because you just know that you're going to see some individuals down the line in a more complex state, which is just harder to help. So the onus on, as has always been the case, prevention and early intervention and meeting people where they're at is one that we absolutely need to focus on.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, the recommendations are at paragraph 8.1, that we give approval to the reviewed Housing Support Programme 2022-26 strategy. Is everyone in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much, Simon and Dave and the team, for your hard work on that. I hope you're not frustrated by the fact that we can't solve every problem, because you're making a real difference to those that we can help. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Deputy Leader Richard Clark to take us through the last two agenda items, 13 and 14.
Thank you, Leader. Item 13 on the agenda, Project Apollo, and I believe Sue's going to start us off on this.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Yes, I'm pleased to bring the report on Project Apollo Energy, a phased approach for maximising financial savings within our mid-term financial plan and delivering net zero buildings by 2030. One of the nicer things about actions to address the climate emergency, and there are some, is that by reducing carbon emissions, you frequently reduce energy costs and vice versa. This report summarises the success of the Project Apollo Energy Savings Programme established in 2023, which aimed to deliver significant reductions to the Council's energy costs and to our carbon emissions. It also proposes a modification to the programme to build on that success with a medium-term strategy via a three-phase approach. And it's necessary that we start looking more into the medium term as opportunities arise and change in this arena, which can be mind-bogglingly complex, and the sheer range of different climate emergency solutions that are available to us and are developing almost daily, I suspect, we hear of new approaches. So I would very much like to thank all those involved for their hard work so far, and ask Mark if he would just take us through the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Following on from Councillor Morgan's excellent summary, just want to take you briefly through the report, if I may. So information, so important information, I guess, in terms of the background, is that Project Apollo energy programme was approved by Cabinet in March 2023. Originally, obviously, the Project Apollo energy programme consisted of 4 work streams: decarbonisation, electrification, efficiency and digitalisation. The success of the Project Apollo Energy was measured through 2 primary performance metrics. As Councillor Moore said, really, was the monthly savings from gas and electricity bills and the annual reduction in carbon emissions. And so, obviously, the metrics have shown a clear indication of the project's impact on both financial performance and environmental sustainability. So, last year, we managed to obtain a saving of circa £374,000. And obviously a reduction in carbon emissions of around about 11%. So significant savings there. Going forward, we want to try and repeat and build upon those measures and align those, obviously, ambitions with the medium-term financial plan. As Councillor Morgan has stated, we've got sort of 3 phases for our intention. Phase 1 will build on the most cost-effective interventions first, which obviously represent the best value for money and provide the most savings during the duration of the medium-term financial plan. You'll see Table 2 will take you to the expected outcomes of our first phase of Project Apollo Energy. The Phase 2 is investment in long-term carbon reductions. Now, whilst technically straightforward to provide emission savings, it's unlikely to deliver meaningful financial relief within the medium-term financial plan at this current time. We think the market will change, and we feel that these measures will become cost-effective as certain issues such as costs of PV panels and the like materials gradually come down. But we don't think that it stands the test in terms of the cost-benefit at this current time. Again, you'll see that Table 4 gives an outline of the interventions, the cost and the full year annual savings, and as you can see, they're not as attractive as those detailed in Table 2. And lastly, Phase 3 will be carbon reduction through heat pump integration, thermal efficiency enhancements and advanced technologies. So we're looking at replacing gas heating systems with, as I say, the heat pumps, enhancing thermal efficiency of our buildings, battery storage and obviously advanced building management systems. Again, we're looking at accessing specific grants for those to relieve the burden on local authority resources, and we'll take advantage of those as and when those opportunities present themselves. Resource planning. The extension of the Project Apollo Energy Programme will require the continuation of additional staff, and obviously Table 6 gives an outline of those costs. 4.18 and 4.19 obviously gives the funding strategy. So we're currently looking to seek funding from the Climate Reserve to deliver Phase 1 of the programme alongside the required staff resources. And as you can see, that is circa £1.2 million. And just to remind you, we're looking at an anticipated annual saving. Let me just check quickly. Of about £346,000 a year. So very roughly that will wash its face within about 4 years. So really what we're looking for is in terms of for Cabinet to consider obviously the approval of the report to date in terms of our performance, looking at and considering the phased approach that we're anticipating, looking to assign the Climate Reserve Fund to enable progression into Project Apollo Phase 1 with immediate effect, and obviously just to give you satisfaction update really that the project Apollo Energy will be monitored through the Council's performance management system, and an annual report will be prepared as well to keep Cabinet appraised of progress. Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions, queries or points? No? Okay. The decision requested is at paragraph 8.1. The Cabinet adopts the expanded Project Apollo Energy Programme and approach to delivery via the 3 distinct phases that Mark has set out. And secondly, the Cabinet approves the request for nearly 1.3 million, as listed in the, from the Climate Reserve Fund to fully deliver phase 1 of the programme and the required staff resource. All members of Cabinet approve? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark and the team. I believe you're there for the next one anyway, which, if I can get my tongue around it, bear with, just switch screens. Expanding domestic insulation support via Great British Insulation Scheme and additional Eco4 Flex partner. Sue, over to you again.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Last one, you'll be glad to know. Yes, this is an example, I think, of just as we're working hard to improve the energy efficiency of our own buildings, so we're determined to support our residents to do the same with their own homes. And Eco4 Flex is one of the support schemes available to help our residents improve the energy efficiency of their homes. And by doing so, help address their cost of living pressures and help us with our transition to net zero carbon for Torfaen as a whole by 2050. All of these are big, tall order issues, and we know from media coverage that insulation schemes, home energy schemes have had a mixed press and a mixed reception in the past. So this is against a background of an emerging and a changing scene where some people have different views on the effectiveness of these schemes. But we've been trying to promote the Eco4 Flex scheme for a little while. To date, we've only used a framework facilitated by Cardiff Capital Region. However, with the advent of a development called the Great British Insulation Flex Scheme, there are new opportunities that we can promote to our residents. And this report outlines how we want to expand our arrangements to encourage more people to take up the support where it's appropriate for them and where it's properly delivered by a new partnership with an expert in this field who has a proven track record, Warm Wales. Before I hand to Mark, though, our Deputy Director for Highways and Climate Change, given that there are 4 reports on today's Cabinet, I just wanted to draw together my thanks, really, for the leadership and the professionalism of our officers in supporting us in tackling climate change in such a range of ways. I mean, just for today, we've been looking at recycling education, we've been looking at waste processing, we've been looking at council buildings and how we support our homeowners and residents to have more sustainable homes. The sheer range of the climate nature emergency agenda is breathtaking, and the need for a whole council approach is never clearer than in this issue. So I just want to put on record our thanks to our Chief Executive and to Mark for their leadership of this, and to 3 of the many very able officers who are supporting us, who are here with us today: Claire Cutforth, Gwen Ham, Gary Neal. Thank you for all that you're doing on this. We work as one, we work together because this is an emergency that affects us all, and all our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So before I just wanted to put that on record before I hand to Mark to just briefly outline the new arrangements for the Eco4 Flex. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. As usual, you covered the topic beautifully, really, and it leaves me very little, which is great. So just I'll pick up some of the salient points, really, and just to provide some information, really. If you look at paragraph 3.8, I refer to that. It's got a statement of intent, and just to explain, really, that our ambition is to, within the report, is to seek permission to alter the statement of intent. 3.8 explains the reason why we need it in terms of creating transparency and public accountability for the council supporting the eligibility criteria for properties to seek support of these various grants. And as Councillor Morgan said, Whilst the EcoFlex system is in place, we have grown a little bit impatient with the limited success of that approach, and we're looking to draw in more partners so we can up the pace and vary the offer to our residents as well, to better support them. Moving quickly on to section 6 in terms of the implications. There's no financial implication for Torfaen in terms of this. It's funded directly from the energy suppliers under the provision of the Energy Company Obligation Scheme. So we won't be expected to provide any additional funding. And there are minimal risks again, as more or less as reiterated previously, in terms of we're just a facilitator and supporting our local residents and signposting them into these projects and this helping system in terms of advice and direct them to seek in grant funding. So the action following this decision, subject to Cabinet approval, is obviously the statement of intent will be updated to include the new partners. MOU and data sharing agreement will be set up with Warm Wales should the partnership be agreed. And the statement of intent will be published, which will enable residents to access the various partnerships and schemes that we promote. The Council's website will be updated to provide residents with up-to-date information on the various schemes and eligibility criteria. So, Section 8 obviously covers the recommendations and outlines that the Cabinet approves the proposals for amending the Statement of Intent, approves our ability to work in partnership with Warm Wales as an additional Eco4Flex delivery partner, and approves that future amendments of a minor nature to the scheme can be made via agreement from an appropriate strategic director. Thank you.
Any comments, observations or points by members? Okay, the recommendations are set out in 8. I was listening to Mark, so I'm not going to repeat them all. They are there for you to read, and he did say them, so I'm not going to go through them again. Can I have a show of hands in support? Again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of today's Cabinet, and indeed 2024's schedule of Cabinets. Like Sue, thanking officers for the climate emergency, I would like to thank all officers for their support of Cabinet, bringing reports and answering any queries that are raised, and any reports that don't come to Cabinet, and dealing with them before they come back to Cabinet. So I will thank you for that. We do work, I think Sue said, a whole council approach. I certainly know in education, you've all supported education, and I do find as a council, we do act together across the party. So can I thank my Cabinet colleagues and officers for their continued support in that endeavour. And I'm going to wish you all a happy Christmas, even though it's the early part of December. My tree is up, so ho, ho, ho. Hope you have time to refresh and recharge over Christmas, or plan your retirement, as some people might be doing. So I conclude the meeting at that point. Thank you.